Okay, this video is for lesson 5.4, and this lesson is dividing decimals, okay? First of all, we're going to work on dividing a decimal by a whole number, okay? So to divide decimals by whole numbers, you're going to start by dividing the decimals just like you would divide a whole number. With does McDonald's sell burgers? Okay, D stands for divide, M stands for multiply, S stands for subtract, and B stands for bring down. Okay, you're going to place the decimal in the quotient, which is the answer to the division problem, straight up from the dividend. So I am going to show you how to do that in this first example, okay? This is dividing a decimal by a whole number. So here's the example, 9.76 divided by 8. 8 is a whole number, but the number we're dividing is not a whole number, it's a decimal, okay? So this is what you do when you have a decimal divided by a whole number. Step number one, you're going to place the decimal straight up into the quotient. So let's write the division problem like this. 9.76, or 9 and 7/6/100 divided by 8. The 8 is a whole number. The only decimal we have in the whole problem is in the dividend. The divisor, 8, is a whole number. The dividend has a decimal. So we're going to place the decimal straight up into the quotient. The quotient, remember, is the answer. So from here, we're going to put it straight up so that the decimals are right on top of each other. And now we're going to start our process of division, which is does McDonald's sell burgers? Okay. So the first step, the word does, D stands for divide. Does 8 fit into 9? Yes, it does. How many times will it fit into 9? It will fit into 9 one time. So the next step is multiply. The M in McDonald's stands for multiply. So we divided, now we're going to multiply 8 times 1. 8 times 1 is 8, and we put it right below the 9. The next step, the S in sell, stands for subtract. So we're going to subtract 9 minus 8 is 1. The last step, the B in burger, is bring down. So we're going to bring down this next number, which is 7 right here. Notice we're ignoring the decimals for now. Once we push it up into the answer, we just ignore it now. So 8, we repeat. We're going to go back up to the B for divide. So 17 divided by 8. So how many times will 8 fit into 17? Well, 8 will fit into 17 twice. And notice that I put the 2 right above the 7, because we are now dividing into 17, which is this 7 and this 1, okay? 8 goes into 17 2 times. The next thing is multiply. 8 times 2 is 16. We're going to put that right here. The next thing is subtract. 17 minus 16 is 1. The next step is bring down. So I'm going to bring down this 6, and I go back to the top. I'm going to repeat. I'm going to go back to the top to divide. 16 divided by 8 is 2. The next thing I'm going to do is multiply. 2 times 8 is 16. The next thing I'm going to do is subtract. 16 minus 16 is 0. The last thing I would do is bring down. I already got to 0 remainder, and there's no more numbers to bring down. So 9 and 76/100 divided by 8 is 1.22. Okay? So basically, what we did, we set up the division problem. We put the decimal straight up from the dividend into the quotient, and then we follow our does McDonald's sell burgers long division steps. Okay? Now, that's how you do it if your divisor, the number you're dividing by, does not have a decimal. That was a whole number. Now we're going to look at what do you do if your divisor also has a decimal, okay? Dividing a decimal by a decimal is what's next, okay? Dividing a decimal by a decimal. All right. So this is our example down here, 3.23 divided by 0.5. So let's write that, okay? 3.23 divided by 0.5. The first thing we're going to do is change the divisor to a whole number by moving the decimal to the right. So here's my decimal in my divisor. I'm going to move it to the right like this and put it right here, okay? If I do that to the divisor, I have to also do it to the dividend. So I'm going to move the decimal in the dividend also the same number of places to the right. So I moved in the divisor, I moved the decimal one place to the right, just one place right there, okay? Now I'm going to move it in the dividend one place. So it's now going to be between the 2 and the 3. So if I'm moving it in the divisor to make the divisor a whole number. Now that number is 5. If the decimal's here, that number is 5. So if I move the decimal in the divisor, I have to move it in the dividend as well. So now what I do is I place the decimal straight up into the quotient. So it's here now because I moved it and I'm going to put it right there. And now I'm basically going to ignore it and do my process of does McDonald's sell burgers, or divide, then multiply, then subtract, and bring down, and then repeat. Okay, so let's do that. So now we have 5 does not go into 3. Does 5 go into 32? Yes, 5 can go into 32 6 times. And notice I put the 6 right above the 2 because I'm dividing 5 into 32. And it goes in 6 times. That was the D for divide. Now I go to M for multiply. 6 times 5 is 30. Then I go to S for subtract. 32 minus 30 is 2. Then I go to B for bring down. Then I repeat. I go back to the top and I go to divide. So 5 goes into 23. How many times? 4 times. Then I go to M for multiply. 5 times 4 is 20. Then I go to S for subtract. 23 minus 20 is 3. And then I bring down, but there's nothing here to bring down, so I'm going to add a 0, and I'm going to bring a 0 down. Okay? 5 goes into 30 6 times. Now I go to M for multiply. 6 times 5 is 30. Now I go to S for subtract. And 30 minus 30 is 0. So I've gotten to my 0 remainder. So the answer to 3.23 divided by 0.5 is 6.46. That means that 0.5 fits into 3.23 6.46 times. Okay? And that is how you divide when both your divisor and your dividend have a decimal. You want to first change your divisor to a whole number by moving the decimal over all the way to the right, and then find your decimal in your dividend and move it over the same number of spaces to the right. Then move your decimal straight up into the answer, and then follow the steps for long division, which is divide, then multiply, then subtract, then bring down, and repeat. Okay? And that is lesson 5.4, where you learned how to divide a decimal by a whole number, and then you learned how to divide a decimal by a decimal.